What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Cure. Today we're going to be talking about Willow Smith's brand new self-titled album, Willow. Now, Willow actually dropped a couple of albums over her earlier teenage years after the very successful Whip My Hair when she was like 10 years old or something like that. These other two albums certainly didn't gain a ton of critical acclaim or popularity, especially compared to her brother's music, regardless of your thoughts on it. He certainly has become a lot more popular for his music than Willow has up to this point, although she is a lot younger in that right. But in many ways, I do think this album feels like a new beginning, a fresh start for Willow. It is self-titled. She's definitely reached a new level of maturity compared to some of her older music, and I think she definitely wants to come off with a bit of a different vibe and a lot more maturity, like I mentioned just a minute ago. And I definitely think she wants to come across as much more of an adult compared to some of her previous music. She experiments with a lot more adult styles, adult lyrical themes, and more unique musical styles as well on this album. This thing is also quite a bit shorter as well. It's 8 tracks and only about 22 minutes, a pretty decent runtime, although some of the tracks do drag on a little bit. Willow really tries to channel other popular styles from other female artists on this album. I hear a lot of Amy Winehouse inspired tracks, a lot of really off-tune, kind of jazzy, a little more grungy, punky sounds on some of the lyrics of these songs. And then in some other places we definitely get a little bit more of a Lana Del Rey vibe, something we're hearing quite a bit nowadays. And I think those are two major influences here. Although this album as a whole just really expressed a little bit more laid back, alternative, kind of experimental musical style, and it is not bad in that regard. There's only one feature on this, and it is Willow's brother Jaden on the second to last track, and unfortunately I think it is probably my favorite song. Iris I really actually liked quite a bit, maybe even more so than Sire, and I think Jaden brings a lot of those same elements to the table on this feature of his as well. Now, there is room to appreciate Willow's interest in exploring these different types of musical styles on here. I think the last song especially really hits the nail on the head with what I think she's going for on this album. I think some of the songs that are a little too close to form for some of these other artists are a little bit weaker. I think sometimes Willow's lyrics can lack a little bit, and her singing can lack a little bit too in some places, especially when she's attempting to be kind of, jazzy, out of key. I think sometimes that seriously misses the mark. But we do have some pretty consistent guitar instrumentation on most of these tracks. That is probably one of the most important instruments on this album. Some pretty basic instrumentals throughout, and I think besides that, there's not too much else to really point the finger at. Everything else is pretty typical. I would say one of my favorite parts about this album is the consistent guitar instrumentation throughout. There's also a lot of pretty cool 90s kind of punky riffs on here, especially one that sounds very Nirvana-esque. So I like that quite a lot, while some of the other instruments are probably lacking throughout the rest of the album. Now, our first track, Free Like a Bird, does not have too much going on. It does have a half-decent guitar instrumental throughout, but besides that, we have some very vague lyrics from Willow referring to freedom and things like that. It gets fairly repetitive. Not too many other instruments on this either. The second verse brings on a decent little drum kit, but that is pretty much the only addition on the rest of the track. And there also is a little bit of experimentation with auto-tune on the back end of this thing, but it is not the craziest opener, and I think it's pretty representative of some of these other songs on this album that are going to miss the mark a little bit. This track leads right into Female Energy Part 2, and this is basically just a continuation of the last track. We have another very simple guitar line on here, some more fleshed out lyrics, at least a little bit more so than the previous track. But the instrumental is just seriously bland. At the end of the track, Willow kind of verges on a grungy lyrical style even. She starts to scream a little bit, really get up there, really play around with the higher octave. And in some places I think it's okay, and in some places I think it's seriously too much. So it is certainly more interesting than anything else happening on the song. So That's something, but I think the screaming may be too much in some places. Time Machine is next, and it is certainly an improvement from both of the two previous tracks in a couple of ways. I think the instrumental is brought up a lot. It is still led by a nice groovy guitar, but there are lots of other instruments on here. It is a lot more interesting to listen to than the previous instrumentals. And the musical style is very, very traditional, 60s, 70s classic. Something that's very popular right now thanks to people like Lana Del Rey with that kind of nostalgic vibe, and Willow definitely kind of goes for that on this track, although it is a little bit more upbeat. I wouldn't call it a somber song or anything like that, so it's a little bit better in that regard. Pretty Girls is really, really bad. Mostly because, Willow just really fully commits to an Amy Winehouse impression filled with crazy out-of-tune notes and really questionable, screams and jumps, and the singing on this song really, really kills it. It's just really hard to listen to in some places, despite the fact that, the instrumental is okay, I suppose. The song's also interesting with its lyrical styles. Willow just, came out saying she's attracted to both men and women. The song is very, very clearly directed at females, so I think that's cool, but the singing is just awful. It's the worst on the album, and I think she hits the mark in other places, but this one just goes too far, and I think the impression is a miss. Samo Is Now is a big improvement from the previous track with some really on-point singing, an awesome, really Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana-esque guitar riff leading this song, and a lot more collected lyrics from Willow as well. I think there's a ton of improvements here. The instrumentation is a lot more varied and elaborate throughout. It's a very dark and kind of mysterious, a little bit still an edgy track, but it is executed very, very well. We have some really ominous lyrics throughout. They're powerful though, they're meaningful when Willow sings them. They're all in tune, and I think as a whole this song is put together a lot better. Is next with Willow's brother Jaden Smith on it, and this song is also a lot better for a lot of reasons. The instrumental still features a guitar primarily, but the guitar is a lot more experimental, a lot more Latin, a little bit more adventurous, and I like that quite a bit. But Jaden's presence just immediately makes the song better. He has a very cool rhythmic verse on this where he plays with the instruments in the background. Then he bars quite a bit right in the middle of his verse as well with some really awesome wordplay. Again, he's really on point with the rhythm as well. His verse is very tied in with the instrumental, and I like that quite a bit. And this was an awesome addition to a track. I think, it definitely makes the song better, and this album needs some tracks like this to bring it up a little bit. Finally, Overthinking It is a really awesome attempt at this kind of, more grungy, edgy musical style with a Amy Winehouse influenced lyrical style as well, and Willow does it so well on this. We've got a really legit drum kit, nice and loud to kick off this song, and then other instruments are slowly added. Again, we have some guitar, a cool trumpet line as well on this, and Willow really comes in with some more collected, in-tune lyrics that sound really nice actually. But then the second half, goes seriously crazy. Willow starts to scream again. She starts to wail a little bit. She gets up into the higher octaves, but she does it really well this time. This is certainly a successful attempt at this musical style, and this is also an awesome way to close out this album. It really, really feels like a fantastic ending. It doesn't feel forced. The different musical styles that are brought into this track are really cool as well. It gets loud. There's a ton of ambient background noise and things like that. Then we have an awesome shout section that pays homage to other tracks from the past with some sampled lyrics and things like that. And Willow continues on with this loud, kind of yelling, screaming, singing. And I like it quite a bit. I think it's a really cool way to end this album. So overall, I think this was a pretty decent attempt at an album from Willow. We definitely see some reimagining of herself and her persona, her musical persona at least, on this album, a rebirth of sorts and a new beginning for her. And I like the musical style that she's going for overall. I think tracks on the first half of this album definitely miss the mark more than they make it, but there are a few on the back end that have a lot better executed instrumentals and much better lyrics as well. Really on point singing from Willow. more collected. The songs are definitely more enjoyable to listen to, and the Jaden feature is really great as well. So unlike some albums, I think this album starts weaker than it ends, but it is worth getting all the way through. Creatively, I think this thing is pretty nice. Willow definitely pulls from a lot of different influences, and she comes up with a lot of her own ideas as well on this, so I respect her for that. And I think this is another pretty decent attempt from Willow, and I'm sure she will keep evolving musically. She is only 18 years old, and her brother, over the last couple of years, has really come into the musical fray as a professional, so I think there's definitely a possibility for her to do that as well. Production-wise, I think we're lacking a little bit. I don't know, maybe Willow produced a lot of these on her own, played all the instruments on her own and things like that, and that would be really cool, but the instrumentals are really not very interesting. A lot of them are super bare bones, super typical, super minimal, and sometimes her lyrics certainly don't save that, and I think that's what makes some of the first tracks in this album a lot weaker. We are decently varied on this thing. I think there's definitely a overall style that you could put all of these songs into, but some of them diverge, whether they're a little bit edgier or maybe a little bit more laid back or something like that, so there is some decent variety here. Not every song sounds the same. And we do have 8 tracks, it's 22 minutes, I think it is a decent run time. I think you're going to feel like it's longer because of the lack of anything really going on in some of the first tracks, but I think it does finish well, so decent amount of content going on here too. Overall, this is really just a decent album. There are a few pretty good tracks on here, I think especially the closer and the song with Jaden. Some cool instrumentals as well, but Willow definitely needs to continue evolving musically, developing her own style, and I'm sure she will continue to do that. So I want to thank you guys so much for checking out this review this week, and please stay tuned for lots more of these album reviews coming up in the future. Catch you guys on the next one.